Number 10. Patton Parnell vs. Morlun. This one goes down pretty quickly in the comics, but we also get a lot of time to get attached, or afraid more like, of Patton Parnell before he meets his end, at least. Patton Parnell is an alternate of Spider-Man, but he couldn't be introduced at a worse time in the comics, in terms of his own self-preservation. He is introduced at a time when Morlun and the Inheritors are running rampant across the multiverse, killing spider totems. As such, just when Parnell's story seems to be reaching its horrifying conclusion, with him becoming a spider-human monster hybrid and chasing after the girl of his dreams who he seems to now be inclined to possibly murder horribly, Morlun shows up. And he does what he does best, kill this spider totem, making Patton Parnell's story very short-lived. Which is good for his neighbor Sarah Jane in the moment, but unfortunate for us readers, as he was a super creepy villainous Spider-Man alternate, and personally I loved him. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, please click that subscribe. Do it, do it, do it! Number 9. Joker vs. Red Skull. Oddly enough, despite being from two very different worlds, these two fought one another in the comic Batman and Captain America, a joint comic venture from both Marvel and DC, written by and with inks by John Byrne. While Batman and Captain America teamed up in the comics, also swapping sidekicks, so do their enemies, the Joker and Red Skull. However, when the Joker learns of Red Skull's bizarre patriotism and ideology, he swears to fight against him. On learning of the Skull's allegiance and Red Skull's offer for Joker to join him and his people, Joker responds by stating, "I may be a criminal lunatic, but I'm an American criminal lunatic." Despite his strong stance against the Red Skull and what he represents, however, Joker is pretty easily defeated here in this fight, being knocked out by one of Skull's goons before being dragged onto the plane to be taken back to Germany. Of course, they never do make it there, and Joker gets the last laugh in the end. Well, really the heroes get the last laugh in the end, but like many fights involving the standard Joker, this one against Red Skull is fairly one-sided. Number 8. Green Goblin vs. Sin Eater. I think the really cool thing about this fight is that in defeating Norman Osborn, Sin Eater also freed him. For Sin Eater, defeating a villain usually has to do with absolving them of their sin, which was exactly what happened here when Sin Eater finally caught up to Norman Osborn. Taking his gun, he fired and shot Norman directly, thereby removing his sin from him. Norman begged and pleaded to not be absolved because he claimed he wanted to beat his own demons by himself, but it turns out that this was likely not really Norman talking, but the Green Goblin, who probably was just pleading to try and maintain his sense of evil.
Number 7. Joker vs. Simon. Yes, it is the Joker again, and guess what? He will appear later on as well. But I also hear you asking, Adam, who the heck is Simon? Exactly. That's my point. You think that the infamous Joker is going to fall to a guy named Simon, who most people haven't even heard of? Simon is a villain of the Teen Titans who has vast telekinesis and telepathic powers, and he is also the leader of the Fearsome Five. But in Salvation Run number 2, he is a member of the new Injustice League when a bunch of villains get exiled to an alien world. He attempts to convince his fellow supervillains that escape is impossible, and then proceeds to lay down plans for beginning a new civilization, only to be very abruptly interrupted by the Joker, who runs up and smashes Simon's brain in with a rock repeatedly. Like I said, it was very abrupt.
Number 6. Dr. Doom vs. Morgan Le Fay. Doom is often one who believes he is more powerful than all, and in most cases, he's usually right, possessing a brilliant mind and extremely powerful will, and also being skilled in the use of magic. However, even with being a former student of Morgan Le Fay's, even his magic prowess is no match for her own. When Morgan learns that in the future her student and lover Victor will betray her, she decides to strike first. She travels through time to kill him, and although he attempts to stand against her, she very nearly succeeds in defeating him for good. But even though the Dark Avengers do come to stop her, the initial battle here is quick and painful for Doom before he ends up being rescued. Number 5. Marvel Universe vs. the Progenitor. This one was quite the doozy. Remember how we were talking about AXE? Well, doesn't end with Druig unleashing Uranos. Although Uranos plays a key role and is a massive threat in this story, he isn't even the main antagonist here. That role is actually taken by the Progenitor. The Progenitor is the Rebel Eternals' response to Druig's reign and his attack on mutants. They decide the best way to stop him is to resurrect a Celestial, creating their own version of one of the cosmic gods, and giving it a moral system which would actually help the Celestial to see their side of the argument, thereby defeating and deposing Druig. This, however, does not work out as planned. With the help of the Avengers and mutant geneticist Mr. Sinister, the Eternals create their god god, but it turns out that the progenitor is less interested in judging solely Druig and more interested in judging all of Earth. And if found lacking, the progenitor promises that within 24 hours, Earth will be destroyed as a result. And after the 24 hours are up, and it does indeed judge Earth to be unworthy, it begins to deliver on its promise, killing many of Marvel's most prominent and most powerful heroes. Number 4. Ishmael Gregor vs. Black Adam. This one comes to us from the recent DC film released exclusively in theaters, Black Adam. The initial fight between these two characters is a fast and brutal one, thanks to Black Adam's rage. In this world, Black Adam is more pitched as an anti-hero, but in the comics he has been known as a straight up villain before. Although right now I would say in the comics he's also more of an anti-hero, so kinda makes sense. Still, even in the DCEU, this is a guy who has god tier powers and who just straight up kills people who get in his way. In the case of Ishmael Gregor, he is the descendant of Black Adam's oldest enemy, the King of Kahndaq, who once oppressed his own people in search of greatness. When Ishmael seems to be trying to follow in his ancestors' footsteps and also kidnaps the son of Adriana Tomaz, Amon, both of whom are Teth Adam's allies, Black Adam loses it, emitting a powerful blast of electric energy that defeats Ishmael instantly. While this defeat is swift, it turns out that it's not permanent, however, as this may have been part of Ishmael's plan all along.
Number 3. Batman Who Laughs vs. Perpetua. Remember how I said Joker would be showing up again? Well, I kinda half lied. It's actually a Jokerized Batman, which is taking two of the arguably most popular DC hero and villain combos and mashing them together. Who can stand in the way of that? Also, to call this fight one-sided is a little debatable, but the Batman Who Laughs rose from being just a man to becoming a multiversal level threat very quickly after he gained access to the powers of Dr. Manhattan. This level of power allowed him to face and defeat Perpetua, one of, if not the, most powerful god in DC Comics, who is mother of the multiverse. He became the nightmare of one of the most powerful beings in all of DC Comics, sealing her away within fragments of the Source Wall.
Number 2. Joker vs. Poison Ivy. One of the most brutal fights in comics comes unsurprisingly from the world of Injustice, though more specifically we're talking about Injustice Year Zero, issue number 8. Here Poison Ivy pays the Joker a visit to get revenge for the years of mistreatment towards his then ex, Harley Quinn. Ivy is inspired to do this after Harley reveals that she secretly had his daughter, and Ivy warns the Joker that if he ever hurts Harley again, she'll kill him. Despite the Joker threatening Ivy throughout this fight, it's very clear who has the real power between the two of them here. Number 1. Geist vs. Magneto. Geist vs. Magneto has to be one of my favorite all-time short-lived and brutal villain versus villain fights. Though really, between them, it's pretty apparent that Geist is the real villain here, I think. Magneto ends up doing his best to catch Geist and runs into him after he escapes punishment in Terra Verde in the late 80s Wolverine series. Magneto lures Geist out with a little mechanical toy and makes short work of him. While his fate isn't explicitly shown on panel, considering that Geist is a cyborg and Magneto is the master of magnetism, we can imagine how brutal this fight would be, and based on what we do see of what happens to the decoy robot toy, I think we know what's gonna happen there. Number 10. Batman vs. Red Hood. During the story Under the Red Hood, Batman ends up face to face with Red Hood, aka Jason Todd. For years Jason Todd was thought dead, but at this point it's been revealed that he is in fact alive, and has been for some time. Jason decides to return to Gotham and seek out Batman as the vigilante Red Hood. However, there is a great conflict between the two, with Batman fighting Red Hood during their first encounter and later condemning Jason for his brutal form of justice and his willingness to kill those who stand against him. When Batman attempts to persuade Jason to rejoin him, this has the opposite effect, only turning Jason more towards the darker path. Jason gives Batman an ultimatum: kill the Joker or kill him. You see, Jason wasn't mad that Batman wasn't able to save him years ago, or that he didn't come looking for him after his seeming death. He was mad that the Joker was still alive, with Batman allowing him to go on living, despite what he'd done. Batman refuses, however, to kill Jason or the Joker, instead preventing Jason from shooting the villain. As a result, Jason becomes an enemy of Batman, and a villain in general. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by hitting that subscribe button? Do it, I dare you. Number 9. Guardians of the Globe and Invincible versus Machine Head, Hired Goons, and Battle Beast. This has to be one of the most brutal fights we've seen thus far in the animated series Invincible, though fans of the comics know that this really is just the beginning. Mark Grayson as Invincible hoped to help one of Machine Head's hired goons, Titan, escape his criminal life. However, in the end, he was betrayed by Titan, who only wanted to take his boss's title and position. And Invincible, as well as the Guardians of the Globe, also ended up getting their butts handed to them by Machine Head's hired muscle, Battle Beast, to boot. Which, I mean, fair enough. Battle Beast is nuts. Number 8. The Suicide Squad versus Starro the Conqueror. Because, I mean, come on, you know I gotta do it. You know I gotta do it. Starro the Conqueror is one of the most destructive forces we've seen in the DCEU, and also maybe has one of the saddest stories besides in terms of his origins. That's right, for this one we are pivoting over to the DC Extended Universe, the name for their cinematic universe, and James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. Here, Starro the Conqueror is an alien lifeform that was basically kidnapped from outer space, brought to Earth, and experimented on by the Thinker. Over time he has grown to be massive and of course quite angry at his captors. When the Suicide Squad are tasked with uncovering the secret of Project Starfish and destroying the base that houses it, they end up freeing Starro, causing mass destruction in Corto Maltese. They defeat Starro in the end, but some of them of course die along the way, and the amount of property damage and casualties as a result of this fight is pretty immense. Number 7. Mephisto vs. Khonshu. While Mephisto doesn't end up as being permanently defeated, Khonshu, with his avatar Moon Knight, still manages to kill a hefty number of Mephistos. It turns out there are a bunch of different alternates, so Mephisto is able to just kinda like keep coming, but Khonshu, with stolen powers of the Avengers and the help of Moon Knight, ends up defeating 100 Mephistos in one day, which is wild. That's a lot of Mephistos. One is honestly a lot. And if you're wondering why Khonshu is being considered a villain here, it's because during this story arc, Age of Khonshu, he was actually kind of revealed to be one, acting in the name of justice but really taking over the world himself and then turning it into kind of like his own Egyptian underworld in the name of defeating Mephisto. Number 6. Great Ring of Arakko vs. Uranos. This one was pretty brutal for Arakko, and it was a surprisingly quick fight. This all went down during the event Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals Judgment Day, or AXE for short. With the revelation to the world that the mutants were capable of resurrection, new Prime Eternal Druig realized he could use this information to his advantage, and to strengthen his rule. He decided to label the mutants as deviants, seeing their ability to control life and death as excess deviation. Labeling it as such, he went to war with them, and was even convinced to release eternal criminal Uranos. Uranos is known for being one of the most effective warlords around, removing any and all who basically stand in his path and eradicating them and whatever race they belong to or world they belong to completely. When Druig unleashes Uranos on Mars, now known as Planet Arakko, the ruling government known as the Great Ring does not stand a chance against them. I feel like within the first 5 or 10 minutes of that fight, they're pretty much defeated as well, which is pretty crazy because they're like all Omega level mutants.
Number 5. Venom vs. Sandman. In Peter Parker's Spider-Man Volume 1, number 16, Sandman took to reforming the Sinister Six to go after Spider-Man. Now one of those 6 was Eddie Brock, aka Venom. Being the villain he once was, Venom betrayed Sandman and the two got into a fight. Things quickly take a turn for the violent and chompy as Brock/Venom takes a huge chunk out of Sandman's body, causing Sandy to destabilize and break down, unable to stop himself from dissipating into a nearby storm drain. It's a pretty awful and pretty quick dispatching. Sandman does eventually return, but not as his old self, as the years spent in a kind of ghostly form left him in kind of tatters. Damn Venom.
Number 4. Superman vs. the Joker and Harley Quinn. This one definitely ended in major disaster, as it was the event that ended up resulting in the Injustice timeline here. And we all know how that ended up. Awfully. This was a really one-sided fight too, as Superman didn't really stand a chance against the Joker and Harley Quinn's machinations. Which sounds weird to say considering it's Superman, but that's what happened. In this world, they manipulated Superman into thinking that he was fighting Doomsday, when in reality he was actually fighting Lois Lane, you know, his one true love. Discovering only too late what he'd really done, the realization of what they'd made him do basically broke Superman. He would end up killing the Joker in cold blood and turning into a tyrant as a result of this targeted and gross grossly successful attack on Supes and his family. This one comes from a super random place, but is a pretty intense fight between what are likely the two main baddies of the MCU thus far. In the comics Avengers Mech Strike issue number 4, Thanos is brought into this fight to face Kang, who the entire Avengers are basically up against. Unfortunately, despite Thanos' strength and brilliance, even he cannot defeat the Master of Time. All it takes is for Kang to lay his hands on Thanos and force him to experience the power Kang holds over time itself. He ages Thanos rapidly with his touch to the point that Thanos is no more than a skull, which is a creative way to kill him considering that Thanos was boasting of taking Kang's skull for his own trophy following their fight. Kang doesn't even plan to keep Thanos' skull either, tossing it on the ground and saying he doesn't need souvenirs to keep warm memories in his heart. It's kind of a weird thing to say when you kill someone, warm memories, but you know. The Avengers beat him back after this, but it's an impressive show of strength from Kang. Number 2, Captain America vs. Iron Man. When these two fought just as the 2015 Secret Wars event was starting up in Avengers issue number 44 during Time Runs Out, it was literally a fight that ended with the destruction of the multiverse. I don't know how much more disastrous that can get. While Captain America and Iron Man weren't the ones behind the destruction of the multiverse, they also weren't doing much to help prevent it at this point either. This fight had been a long time coming at this point, considering all the pent-up frustration and tension that had been growing between these two over the years, especially after the events of Civil War. The thing is, there will always be room in the comics for a fight between Cap and Tony, because, well, they're both so different in terms of their ideologies. Unless I guess we are in the reality of Earth 3490, where Steve Rogers and a female version of Tony named Natasha Stark are actually married. Although, I'm sure even those two fight, right? Marital fights. Number 1, DC Universe vs. Perpetua. Perpetua is one of the greatest threats the multiverse has ever faced when it comes to DC Comics. And when our famed heroes first faced her, guess what? They lost. I know, it's shocking. That doesn't usually happen in comics. Perpetua's goal was to reshape the multiverse in her own darker image. After she broke free from the Source Wall, she set out to do just this, with the help of her allies Batman Who Laughs and Barbados. In the end, Perpetua would be defeated, even being betrayed by one of her own, with Batman Who Laughs usurping her and taking her power for himself. But still, the temporary threat of a new world where Perpetua ruled was pretty awful. And for a while, she kinda did win, so yeah.
Number 10, Magneto vs. Red Skull. Magneto and the Red Skull are on opposite sides of history. Magneto grew up in a Jewish family living in Germany during World War II, and we all know Red Skull and Hydra's stance in World War II Germany, so it's safe to say that these two villains would almost never get along, right? In Acts of Vengeance from 1989, Magneto and Red Skull were actually temporarily united, but it's really important to note that Magneto was unsure whether this was the Red Skull that aided Germany in the slaughter of his people. So Magneto confronted him and Red Skull confirmed that he was indeed the original. It didn't take much for Magneto, the master of magnetism, to overpower the Skull, but unlike what you might think, Magneto does not take his life. Instead, Magneto leaves the Skull isolated in a stripped down fallout shelter 20 feet underground. He removed the ladder from the escape hatch, gave him 10 gallons of water, took out his homing transmitters, gave him no food and no light, just water, air, and his own depraved thoughts. Number 9, God King Doom vs. Thanos. 2015's Secret Wars has Dr. Doom receiving the power of the Beyonders at the conclusion of Time Runs Out. The Latvian dictator is able to save reality from complete destruction at the hands of the Beyonders, stealing their power and merging all reality into a place called Battleworld, which he rules over as God Emperor. A few characters show up on Battleworld with their full memories intact, and they try to stop Doom and put things back to normal. One of them would be Thanos. Thanos, being the smug mad titan he is, decides to challenge Doom and refuses all of Doom's offers to work with him. So, in one quick movement, Doom plunges his hand into Thanos' chest, grabs a hold of his spine, and turns his body to ash, leaving one of the most amazing comic panels ever. Number 8, Joker vs. Alexander Luthor Jr. The Joker has a special something that just no other villain can really stand up to. What is it? Popularity. People love the Joker. This magic word, popularity, allows the Joker to beat out other villains that in the real world he would never be able to take down. It also allows him to save the day on occasion. In 2005's Infinite Crisis, Earth 3's Alexander Luthor Jr. attempts to remake the multiverse into one perfect reality. Perfect for him at least. By the end, Well, he fails, but he finds himself cornered by Lex Luthor and Joker of New Earth, which is the mainstream continuity. Joker pretty ruthlessly scars Luthor Jr. with acid and then brings his life to a sudden end with a bang. And it was all because Alexander didn't include him in his scheme in the first place.
Number 7. Wakanda versus Namor the Submariner. This fight targeted the entire, often mostly heroic nation of Wakanda. And what's more, it was another supposed hero, or at least anti-hero, doing the damage. This all went down during the Avengers vs. X-Men event, with the Avengers said to have taken up refuge in Wakanda, and Namor being possessed by a piece of the Phoenix Force belonging at the time to the Phoenix Five. He decided to use his power to draw them out. How did he do this? Well, with a tidal wave that destroyed much of Wakanda, killed or hurt many of its people, and ended up causing a split between everyone's favorite couple, T'Challa's Black Panther and Aurora Monroe's Storm. Thanks for that, Namor. Namor!
Number 6. General Zod versus Captain Boomerang. Never put a captain up against a general. It will not go well. In 2016's Suicide Squad, in literally the second issue, Task Force X are sent on a mission to Russia to retrieve or destroy an unknown device. Turns out that device is actually a portal to the Phantom Zone. Rather than leave it be, Captain Boomerang approaches the portal and is literally incinerated down to his ankles instantly by none other than General Zod, who was trapped inside only to break free. I doubt the Boomerang guy would have been able to help much in the squad's fight against Zod. Honestly, it's a miracle any of them actually survived at all.
Number 5. Killer Croc vs. Bane. Back in Batman issue 489, two heroes known for their strength and sometimes monstrous nature fought one another. And while they may have seemed more evenly matched on paper, one of them made quick work of the other. We are talking about the fight between Bane and Killer Croc, which happened in the pages of Batman back in the 1990s. While initially Killer Croc seems confident in this fight, things quickly turn south after Bane breaks his arm. From there, Bane continues to basically kick his butt and leaves him knocked out and bleeding amongst a pile of toys in the Eden Park Mall. The crazy thing was that Bane and Croc didn't even really fight because they had beef, but more because Bane wanted to face Batman. However, Bane leaves after discovering that the Batman he's come across here is not the true Batman, but Jean-Paul Valley.
Number 4. Kite Man versus Riddler's army. Okay, I am a sucker for an underdog. In Batman Volume 3, there was the war of jokes and riddles between the Joker and the Riddler, surprisingly, each fueled by their desire to take Batman's life. Now, each of these lunatics had gathered up a group of villains to their side, and they caused a hell of a lot of damage to Gotham and its people in their war. One person caught in the crossfire would be Charles Brown. Charles became a mole for Batman in Joker's army, and when Riddler found out, he brought Charles's son to an end. Charles became Kite Man and joined up with the Joker to get revenge. With Batman's help, Riddler takes down Joker's army one by one, leaving only Kite Man, who is forced to switch sides. In the final climactic battle though, Kite Man helps Batman and Riddler's army infiltrate the Joker's holdout, and when the battle is won and the villains turn on Batman, Kite Man had a backup plan that allowed him to almost single-handedly incapacitate 8 of the biggest bads on Batman's rogues gallery, helping Batman save the day. Never underestimate Kite Man. Hell yeah.
Number 3. Marvel Universe vs. Onslaught. When Marvel's heroes came up against Onslaught, it took all of them banding together, even joined by some villains, to stand a chance against him. And even then, this seemingly was not enough, with many heroes sacrificing themselves in order to defeat Onslaught for good. At first, we were made to believe that these heroes were dead, gone for good. That's how deadly the threat of Onslaught was. People were willing to lay their lives on the line. Fortunately, that's not exactly what happened, and instead, Franklin Richards, the child of Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, and Susan Storm Richards, aka Invisible Woman of the Fantastic Four, was able to save the day. Despite his youth, Franklin at the time had immensely powerful reality warping powers, and used them without really even being super aware of it, kind of subconsciously, to safely stow Earth's heroes away in a pocket dimension. Onslaught would be defeated, the heroes saved, and shortly after they would make their return to the main reality of Earth 616. But still, we thought they were all dead, so it was a pretty big cost, it seemed at the time.
Number 2. Thanos versus Loki. Taking a break from comic books for a moment here, let's journey to the MCU. Loki is one of those characters who has elevated himself beyond the status of villain into a bit more of an anti-hero role, and the popularity of Tom Hiddleston's portrayal of the character is likely somewhat to blame for that. But popularity is not saving this character. In the opening opening of Avengers Infinity War, Thanos attacks the remaining Asgardians after the events of Ragnarok. Though they are Asgardians, he does seem to lay waste to them pretty easily. With Loki feigning allegiance to the Mad Titan, he makes a move against Grimace with a dagger only to be stopped, disarmed, and choked to death without the big bad even seeming to break a sweat, truly solidifying just how much of a threat Thanos is going to be. And in at number 1 is Thrag versus Dinosaurus. The Viltrumites from the Invincible comic series are a race of near invulnerable, incredibly strong, world-conquering aliens, but none among them stands as strong, as invulnerable as Grand Regent Thrag. Battle-hardened over thousands of years, only the most powerful characters can even hope to stand one-on-one against this powerhouse. David Anders, the villain known as Dinosaurus, is not one of those characters. While Dinosaurus is very strong, it's more his intelligence that is his greatest weapon. Dinosaurus allied himself with Invincible around issue 90 of the comics, and he would see Thrag attempt to take down Mark. Dinosaurus attacks Thrag, but his claws break on Thrag's skin. Thrag pummels the Dino Man, but he stops, distracted by an explosion, giving Dinosaurus the chance to chomp on his head, only for him to completely shatter his teeth, giving Thrag the chance to mock him and then break his jaw and leave him for dead. Luckily, Dinosaurus uses the opportunity to heal and escape with Mark.